The novel Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen is famous and loved by many generations of readers. It was through this novel that I discovered the author's unique style, her subtle ability to portray a society and historical period within a love story. The two protagonists, Elizabeth Bennet and Mr. Darcy, belonging to different social classes, are both well-educated, with a strong mind and a talent for observation. Mutual prejudices and their complex characters led them to make mistakes which almost cost them their happiness. However, they are able to admit and overcome their errors. The writer virtuously guides readers through the very corners of the protagonist's souls, and allows us to see how a witty and prudent girl like Lizzie can become a victim of her own prejudices, and how a rich, proud man, Mr. Darcy, gradually becomes aware of his defects and shows he is capable of the most tender feelings and noblest actions. The novel has inspired numerous film and television adaptations, including a black-and-white version with Laurence Olivier, the BBC miniseries adapted by Andrew Davies, and Joe Wright's film. In my opinion, adaptations of this literary writing need to be handled carefully, given that the current generation of young people is more likely to go to the cinema than to read a book. I could not miss the chance to watch the modern interpretation by Joe Wright. It earned 4 nominations at the 78th Academy Awards, including a Best Actress nomination for Keira Knightley. Furthermore, critics say it is completely in the spirit of Austen's novel. The first thing we see in the movie is Keira Knightley in the lead role as Elizabeth Bennet, walking in a simple rural landscape in front of her humble countryside home. People who read the book immediately ask themselves, how come there are all these animals and the house is so run down and dirty? In Austen's story, the Bennet family, while not being rich, has noble origins and can afford a tidy house and servants. Instead, the director has purposely transformed the Bennets into a rural family, and the dilapidated house, surrounded by mud, serves to emphasize their poverty. The only thing that is not clear is how this sort of farming family would get invited to high society balls. Bingley and Darcy's houses, instead, seem to be castles or museums. Certainly, if a man is rich, he has to live in a house that looks like the Louvre, because otherwise we, the viewers, will not get the point. I have lots of questions for both the people who have made the film and those who have nominated it for awards. But I will not ask why Mr. Bingley, a cheerful, polite, and good-natured young man, is depicted as a complete idiot, or why the scruffy Mr. Bennet looks more like a pirate than a nice, ironic gentleman. I will not even ask why the girls have modern hairstyles or even loose hair, which would have been considered indecent at the time. Instead, I'd like to know why Lady Catherine pays a visit to Bennet's house in the middle of the night, and the housekeeper gives a tour of Pemberley to strangers, while the owners are at home. Moreover, in the book, there was no evidence that Elizabeth and Jane Bennet shared not only a room, but even a bed. Apparently, it is the way in which the director has decided to show intimacy between sisters. The dialogues, those famous dialogues of Jane Austen, full of humor and thoughts, showing the ways in which her characters are behaving, have been changed or even replaced. Indeed, the characters seem smarter only while quoting Austen. Otherwise, they have conversations like this.
I mean, I can read, of course. And I'm not suggesting you can't read out of doors, of course.
I wish I read more, but there always seems to be so many other things to do.
Yes, that's exactly what I meant.
I thought you were in London.
No. No, I'm not.
No.
While in the book the number of well-mannered people in the Bennet family was kept to a minimum, in the film there aren't any at all. All family members, led by Mr. Bennet, eavesdrop behind doors, interrupt each other while talking, giggle, and lick their fingers while eating. The Bennet sisters, including Jane and Elizabeth, run one after the other like crazy, and they even put their feet on the couch. The only things missing are popcorn and the TV remote control. Where is our bright Elizabeth, the sensible and accomplished young lady?
Mr. Darcy? What are you doing here?
Keira Knightley, although I suppose it was on the director's request, makes Elizabeth appear like a nervous, flirtatious, and rude girl. She doesn't show the slightest respect for her mother, and when Darcy declares his love for her, she yells at him.
Has your governess left you?
We never had a governess.
No governess? 5 daughters brought up at home without a governess. I never heard such a thing. Your mother must have been quite a slave to your education.
Not at all, Lady Catherine.
In relation to this, it is absolutely incomprehensible why the behavior of her younger sisters is so wrong, and above all, how such a girl could attract Darcy, who cannot tolerate the stupidity in people. And not only is he in love with her, but he also ignores the will of his late mother and his high-class status. However, we are talking about literary Darcy, as Jane Austen meant to create him. Instead, the character portrayed by Matthew Macfadyen resembles an abandoned puppy and looks wretched. While Jane Austen's Darcy does not speak with people below his level because he does not want to, Mr. Macfadyen's character doesn't do that because he isn't able to. In many scenes of the film, we see the protagonist constantly appear in undergarments in the presence of strangers. Mr. Bingley enters the room where Jane lies sick in bed. Elizabeth is walking at daybreak in a nightgown. In the next moment, we discover that Mr. Darcy is not sleeping either, and has decided to take a walk inside someone else's property with his shirt unbuttoned. He was a noble man, not a stable man. Such behavior would have been admissible for the immoral Wickham, but not for Darcy. In fact, Joe Wright's Darcy is fully in line with the Lizzie depicted by Knightley. Aside from the accomplishments already mentioned, she takes the hand of her insomnia mate and kisses it. Dear Joe Wright and your team, why did you ever give your fantasy the same name as this wonderful novel? Wouldn't it have been better to call it The Shepherd Girl and the Stableman? All right, that title wouldn't sell. And in the end, I appeal to the critics.